Hey guys, hi, welcome back once again. My name is Vaishali, and having learned quite a few things from, through, and from within human interactions, and having pursued and completed my master's in business administration and in clinical psychology, I today wish to talk about what happens when there's a mismatch between intentions and behaviors, or intention and behavior or behaviors. And well, in keeping with that, I'd asked a few people around to help me understand as to what their take was with regards to this particular aspect. A mismatch between intentions and between the behavior. And having received a few answers in keeping with that query, in keeping with that inquiry, what I received was that almost everybody said that when there's a mismatch between the intentions or intention and behaviors or behavior, it leads to lack of trust, which leads to a feeling of insecurity and thereby a feeling of unsafety. And in a way, it represents lack of integrity. And since there's a mismatch between intentions or intention and behavior or behaviors, which naturally shows a gap between thoughts, words, and actions, it results in a lack of transparency. It results in a lack of reliability and dependability. And in a way, through the lens of psychology, it's a direct indicator, implicitly or explicitly, of trauma. So, what actually is a trauma? And from whatever I've learned up till now, it has best been explained by Dr. Gabor Mate, wherein he goes on to say that trauma is what happens inside of you as a result of what happens to you, what happens with you. And over here, Dr. Mate beautifully goes on to elaborate that, say, supposedly you're staying in an area that experiences an earthquake or a hurricane or a tsunami. Well, of course, your lives are going to be dramatically altered. The experience of that incident will change your internal experience as well. And so, in a way, the tsunami, the hurricane, or the earthquake are traumatic events, are traumatic incidences. But what happens within us due to an external event, which kind of shakes up our trust, which kind of makes us feel unsafe, is the emotional trauma that in a way settles in our nervous system. And as much as these big traumatic events causes an internal trauma, wherein either we are constantly on the edge or we are scanning our environments knowingly or unknowingly, these psychological traumas on a very subtle level, on a very implicit level, implied level, also happens through events, also happens through experiences, which may not seem so dramatic, which may not seem so traumatic. So, like I said in the beginning of this video, that a trauma is any experience wherein you lose trust, wherein you feel unsafe, knowingly or unknowingly, wherein you walk with the notion that दूध का जला छाछ को भी फूक फूक के पीता है, knowingly or unknowingly, translating into somebody who's been burnt by hot milk will even be very careful while drinking or while sipping buttermilk. And one can lose trust when consistently somebody's intention and their behaviors do not match. Secondly, trust can also be lost or fractured when bad things happen, when traumatic events happen. But trust can also be lost when good things that should happen, that need to happen, do not happen. And on a very bare minimum level, most of us understand, or rather, I think all of us understand, that we all have some basic needs. Now, our physical basic needs are of food, shelter, and clothing. In a way, all related to bare minimum survival. And like we have these basic physical needs, we also have some basic emotional, psychological needs. And a few of them are the need to be seen, the need to be heard, to be listened to, the need to be understood, the need to be accepted, the need for belonging. And when all of these needs are met on most days of our lives, wherein emotionally we are seen for who we are, wherein we are heard and we are listened to because our thoughts matter, because they are valued, because they have a space and a place to exist, wherein we feel safe to openly and honestly share them, creating a sense of belonging, naturally creates a sense of emotional and psychological safety, an emotional sense of psychological and secure belonging. And it is only when these two things are well matched can we truly feel safe, can we truly feel secure. And if any of those needs are not met on most days, it creates an internal sense of mistrust, of misalignment, of misattunement, and of insecurity, and thereby lack of safety. So, well, how does the mismatch between our intentions and our behaviors result in trauma? And weirdly enough, since our body stores all of our experiences, since our body is the subconscious and does not miss out on anything, whether we remember it consciously or not, but subconsciously, nothing gets lost in the human realm. Nothing gets lost, probably in the universe as well. And so, well, at times, these traumas or these implicit traumas can show up through smell, can show up through taste, can show up through touch, can show up through sounds, can show up through our behaviors. And in order to get into the nuances of that, the details of that, I'd like to share a few examples. So, how do our traumas and our implicit memories come through our senses, reveal themselves through our senses? Well, fortunately and not so fortunately, however we wish to look at it, our senses are quite sensitive and sensible only if we learn to trust them. Only if we learn to observe them, only if we learn to be in tune with them. So here was this client who, in one of his counseling sessions, sat across me and kind of kept rubbing his nose and covering his nose. And since it wasn't something that he had done before or that I had taken notice of before, I gently asked him as to what was bothering him. Why was he kind of covering his nose or blocking his nose? And for a few moments, he refused to reveal anything. Probably he was playing the role of a polite man, the good man. But after my insistence, he asked me as to what was that appalling smell that I was wearing. And it did come as a shock to me because I was wearing a man's perfume. Not going to share the label and the brand, but it was a perfume, it was a fragrance that had been appreciated by almost everybody. In fact, it's one of my favorite smells as well. It's one of the smells that I feel very safe in. And here was this man who was calling that fragrance appalling. Now, of course, having a little bit of his history, I asked him as to who smelt that way in his family. And he told me that one of the grown ups in his family, one of the male grown ups in his family when he was a little kid, smelt like that. And it was this grown up, this male grown up, who used to hit him, punish him, and even twist his ears. And if he cried or if he screamed, the beating got harder, the ear twisting got harder. And as shocking as that information was for me, in a way, as his counselor, it also revealed to me that trauma can even reside in our sense of smell, and what feels safe and what does not feel safe, or rather feels like a punishment, feels like an abuse, can also hit home for a lot of people. Now, in a similar way, through a different sense, through a different sensory perception, trauma can also reveal itself in a very different way, or it can taste very differently. So, over here, I'd like to share two examples wherein somebody can develop such an aversion to cashews, to smells of cashews, to taste of cashews, to even sweets that are made of cashews. Because when they were a little kid and had received sweets of cashew as gifts, and as any little kid had not wanted to share their bits of gift with somebody else, the well meaning, the well intentioned adult in the family, in order to teach this little kid a lesson, had stuffed their mouth with sweets of cashew. Quite likely they would want to resist. Quite likely they would want to throw up because after a while it feels a little too much. And though the intention was well meaning, wherein the grown up wanted this little kid to learn the art of sharing, the behavior with regards to that intention was misaligned. Now, since that time, it's been more than 3 to 4 decades wherein this person has not touched cashew or cashew related sweets. In a similar way, somebody can have an aversion to ghee, clarified butter, or mustard oil because somebody whom they considered their own had sexually assaulted them, had sexually abused them. And so, why did this person develop a repulsion and aversion to anything that smells like ghee, clarified butter, or mustard oil? Was because the person who had assaulted them smelt like ghee and mustard oil. And in a way, if you observe and if you recognize, if you understand that trauma is both physical and psychological, at times it's very implicit but shows up in very explicit ways much later in life. And at times it's very explicit and shows up in very explicit ways. Trauma is not just a wounding within the insides, within the psyche. It's not the breaking of the trust and the feeling of unsafety within the psyche, but it also happens within the relational dynamics as well. It happens through the relational dynamics as well. And over a time, if not resolved, if not addressed, if not healed, if not recognized, it starts to turn into distress, disorders, and disease, both on a very personal level and on the relational level as well. Now, trauma can also happen through comparisons, even when the intention is well, but the behavior somehow doesn't support that intention. Like it's shown in the movie Tare Zameen Par, wherein the intention of the parents is really good, for they want their child to succeed, for they want their child to do well, for they want their child to be appreciated. They want this kid to be praised like their elder son is. And yet, this child is not seen for who he truly is not heard, listened to for who he truly is not understood for who he truly is, resulting in a lot of frustration, a lot of anger within the parents, which unfortunately comes out on him through verbal and physical abuse and also through comparison with the other sibling. And in a way, despite living within the family, he feels lonely. He doesn't get the sense of belonging that could make him feel secure and safe. He begins to feel like an outsider. And in a way, even though the intention was well meaning, the behavior was not in support of that intention or those intentions. In a way, making that child almost feel emotionally orphaned, emotionally neglected. For though all of his physical needs with regards to fooding, clothing, and shelter were met, his psychological needs were not addressed, were not taken care of, were not looked into, were not addressed, were not nurtured. And if there's a mismatch between the basic needs in these two realms, we naturally begin to lose trust and naturally begin to feel a lot more unsafe. And anything that cannot be trusted and feels unsafe is trauma that has far reaching consequences much into our adult lives than we actually realize, for they are not so obviously visible. For many a times, we have even normalized them. Now, a few days back, I had heard an interview that was done with Ranbir Kapoor, wherein he had beautifully gone on to express in one of his most candid conversations that his father was a lovely man. He was a very passionate man, that he loved his father a lot, but despite that love, he was really afraid of him as well. He was really scared of him as well because his father had a very volatile temper. He had even gone on to mention that when he was growing up, there was a lot of argument, there were a lot of raised voices that he heard take place between his parents. And he found himself sitting on the edge of the steps, feeling a little jittery, feeling a little unsafe as to what is going to happen next. He goes on to mention that though his father never raised his hand on him, but just because he had such a volatile temper, he could not even look up to his father to even know the color of his father's eyes. And hearing a child say that with regards to their own parents, that they don't even know the color of their parents' eyes when they are still alive, is something to be reflected upon. He even goes on to share that his father never really appreciated the movies, never even understood the movies that were probably, in his own opinion, some of his best performances. Wherein, in his own opinion, his finest works were through the movies like Rockstar, like Barfi, like Tamasha, like Wake Up Sid. And yet his father could not appreciate his finest performances, but rather appreciated the works that were commercially successful and had mass popularity. And of course, here Ranbir Kapoor acknowledges that maybe his father was conditioned in a different way, wherein success to him meant a different thing. Success for him was not about the finest works, but more about the mass appeal, more about the commercial appeal, rather than his own growth as an actor. In a way, also reveals a few things that he was able to understand, objectively understand, his father's own conditioning through his own environment, through the culture that he grew up in, and through his own surroundings, through his own development. And yet, at the same time, it also reveals that he had to earn his love, his appreciation. And in a way, it tells us that he probably understood his father a lot more than the father was willing to understand his own son. This aspect probably also reveals that quite likely Ranbir Kapoor had to earn his appreciation and thereby to a degree his love, earn it from his father. It was not given unconditionally, and only when those conditions were met did his father appreciate him and applaud for him. In this interview, he also goes on to mention, he also goes on to share that he hates confrontations, that he has difficulty saying no, probably having a people pleasing personality to a very large degree, or as Oprah would call it, a disease to please, and an avoidant attachment style in his interpersonal relationships, wherein he says that his relationship with his father was respectful but distant. And so is his relationship with his sister, a little distant. And it was only after the birth of his daughter that he probably began to open up a little. In a way, also tells us that because he finds it difficult to say no, He probably also has difficulty establishing and negotiating boundaries, creating codependent or even enmeshed relationships in his life. He even in this interview goes on to share, goes on to express that even till date, somebody speaks to him in a loud voice. He feels on the edge, it disturbs him. He feels uncomfortable. And this is a man who's experienced stardom, who supposedly has it all: money, wealth, fame, and everything else that we probably all desire. And yet, he has his own psychological wounds that he's been kind enough, open enough, and generous enough to share with all of us. And it probably happened because he felt safe with the person who was conducting the interview, rather, whom he was interacting with. And yet, as an observation, when I was watching this conversation take place, even when this superstar, when Ranbir Kapoor had opened himself up so candidly, his hands were still crossed. Just like it's shown in the movie Tare Zameen Par. In yet another movie, Dabang, Sonakshi Sinha's first movie, wherein she goes on to say the very famous dialogue, "Sab thappar se dar nahi lagta, par pyar se lagta hai." Translating into, "So I'm not afraid of being slapped, but I'm afraid of love. I'm afraid of receiving love. I'm afraid of being loved." In itself is a trauma response, which may be true for many of us as well, not on the conscious level, but on the subconscious level. And many a times, when we are not chasing love, when we're not chasing appreciation, it kind of feels weirdly disturbing. It kind of almost feels hollow. It may also seem like too good to be true. And yet, almost all of us are wanting to feel appreciated, to even give appreciation, are wanting to feel loved, and to even give love, to share love. And most of us, on a very unconscious level, would find ourselves pushing away love despite wanting to have it, despite even wanting to chase it. And that in itself is a trauma response, even when traumatic things did not happen, even when the seemingly traumatic things did not happen. Good that needed to happen, that should have happened, did not organically happen. We find ourselves pushing that thing away despite wanting it, despite even chasing it at times. So, once again, as Dr. Mate would say, trauma is not only the bad thing that happens to us, which shakes and rattles our trust, which makes us feel a little unsafe, both on the psychological and on the physical level. It's also the good thing that should have happened, that needed to happen, which did not happen, results in a traumatic experience inside. Now, trauma can also look like inconsistency. When a person receives a little too much attention on some days and then no attention or barely any attention on other days, creates an environment of unpredictability and thereby no dependability, no reliability, and thereby generating a feeling of unsafety, leading to the feeling of mistrust. And if I could compare it, I'd probably compare it to a slot machine. The slot machine in the casinos, wherein on some days we would receive a whole bunch of things, a whole bunch of money. And on some days, despite our presence and despite our investment, and despite us putting money after money into that machine, into the slot of that machine, we still don't receive anything. It's like a dragon that keeps asking for more and more. It's like, give me more, give me more, give me more. And I'll only give you once in a while. And if we have experienced That kind of an inconsistency in the earliest years of our lives, our nervous system gets wired for that kind of a slot machine game. And yet it keeps us on the edge. And anything that keeps us on the edge for most days of our lives creates chronic stress, distress. And unfortunately, the nervous system that has gotten wired to the rush of such highs and lows finds it difficult to embrace stability. But the rush of that high and low is not as addictive, is not as compelling as a secure, stable ground. Somebody can also feel abandoned when their basic psychological emotional needs are not met, are not nurtured, are not cared for. Essentially, of being seen, of being heard, of being listened to, of being understood, of being held, of feeling belonged. And that can happen when one or a few of these needs go unmet, leading to emotional starvation. And it can also happen when the child feels unwanted right from the mother's womb. It can also happen when the child is neglected for way too long, when the caretakers, when the parents are too occupied with the other stuff in their life, either their relationship or their job or their household or some other factors. Feeling neglected can also lead to feeling of not feeling safely belonged, which naturally circles back to feeling unsafe, not just on a very personal level, but on relational levels as well. It can come across in very clingy behaviors, excessively clingy behaviors, or as behaviors wherein people actually project the image that they don't need anyone, that they don't want anyone. The term that is also called as hyper independent. And of course, it must be re emphasized that the parents were not doing anything deliberately to harm the child, to hurt the child. In fact, they probably were doing the very best that they thought was right. But in some ways, there was a lack of attunement within the relational dynamics. And because of that lack of attunement and the parents' own conditioning, given their own generation, given the generation that they came from, impacted this child. Somebody who's in their early 50s to mid 50s recently shared with me that they were always asked to play small in their lives, that good people don't voice their opinions a lot, but listen to the elders a lot. They don't express themselves a lot, but they obey the elders a lot. And invariably, this person said that over the years, when they would have guests in their house, they would kind of tidy up the entire place and keep their stuff in some corners of the house so as to be able to make some space for the guests. And in a way, what they were trying to tell me was because they were cultured into not saying too much, into not expressing too much, into not occupying bigger spaces. They were trying to make space for everybody else so that they could fit themselves into one small, tiny space in their own home. And rather, let me rephrase it. I'm very glad they did not say home, but they said house. They were trying to occupy a small little space so that others could spread themselves in their own house. And there's a lot of difference, the emotional difference, the psychological difference between a home and a house. A house is not probably a place where we belong, where we feel a sense of belonging, but a home is a place wherein nurturing, caring, sharing, trusting, belonging all naturally happens. In fact, a home is a place wherein those feelings are intentionally and deliberately taken care of, attended to. And so these kinds of trauma reactions or responses linger much longer into our nervous system, into our relational dynamics, than their original or their actual events. And all these trauma reactions and responses arise when there is a mismatch between the intentions and the behaviors. The lack of integrity arises when there's a mismatch between our intentions and our behaviors or our actions. And through this video, it might come across like I'm trying to blame the parents. Well, I'm not, because I'm a parent myself. And unknowingly, non deliberately, unintentionally, like every other human, I had also wounded my own child. And then, through trials and errors, had to learn differently to be able to heal those wounds, to be able to close that gap, to be able to nurture that relationship again, to be able to turn it into a safe ground for me and for my daughter, wherein safety is built through trust, which is built through openness, through honesty, through accountability, and through approachability. It's also about telling parents, both from the lens of being a parent and a counselor, nobody needs us to be perfect, but rather if we can accept and embrace our own humanness with much more grace, we'll have more compassion for ourselves and for others. And it's also to share with slightly grown up kids. Whatever your parents' age might be, they are humans just like you, just like everybody else. And we all learn through trials and errors. Condition applied being only if we are willing to learn. Only if we are willing to acknowledge that many a times, rather most times, we need to understand, we need to reflect if our intentions match our behaviors. And if they don't, what can we do to match that up? To be able to trust ourselves a little more, to be able to feel secure and safe within ourselves a little more, and create the same kind of trust and the same kind of safety within our relationships as well. So let's try and reflect on that, and I will see you once again the next week. Till then, stay tuned in. And guys, if you do like the contextual content of these videos, please do like, share, and subscribe.